Welcome to the AcuGraph 4 Getting Started webinar. I'm Dr. Larson, and we'll start here in just a moment, just as soon as we make sure that everybody that wants to attend has the opportunity to log in. I see folks still doing that right now. Looks like we've got a fair number of attendees, still have a couple joining us, but it is time to get rolling with the AcuGraph 4 webinar. First of all, I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to point out a couple of features. First of all, there's an icon where you can raise your hand if you have a question or need to be recognized. There's the hand icon, and there's also the question mark icon where you can type questions. We will be having a question and answer, so you're welcome to type questions, and I'll answer them as we go, or I'll answer them at the end. Okay, so to begin, first of all, hopefully by now you've all got your AcuGraph 4, received it, and gotten it set up. And you should be able to view the screen that you're seeing now when you launch your AcuGraph 4. You'll see that we've launched into secure mode. We're right here in the Patients window. You'll see that I'm pointing up here at the top to the Patients icon. And the way that I'm going to organize the webinar today, I'm going to go through each of the screens, each of the windows, and I'm going to go feature by feature and show you each of the various features that are available, demonstrate all of the functions. And then, of course, you're welcome to ask questions, and we'll go through those as well. Currently, I've got everybody muted, so if you're speaking to me, I can't hear you. If you need to ask a question, then use the question feature where you can type a question, and then I can unmute you and you can ask it for the group. Okay, so to begin with then, we'll start out up at the top. We're up here in the Patients area that I'm highlighting right now. And under the Patients window, there's a variety of functions that you can perform with AcuGraph. First of all, this is where you will add a new patient or where you will access patients that are already in your system. Now you'll notice here in the middle it says Secure Mode. Secure Mode simply means that it's hidden all of your patient information. This is designed for patient security when you have personally identifiable information and your screen is visible to unauthorized people. Then Secure Mode is where it automatically reverts to. If you want to get out of secure mode and you want to see all your patients listed, you simply click here on Show All. It will give you a warning, and you can tell it not to show the warning anymore if you click over here on the Don't Show Again. And then it will give you your list of all of the patients, and of course you can click Hide All to hide them, make them go away. And so here in the list of patients then, you can scroll through by scrolling. You can sort simply by clicking at the tops of the columns here, so sorting by first name, sorting by last name, date of birth, last exam. Very quick and easy to do. And then, of course, you can also search. And so I'm going to search for the patient called Example Patient. I just start typing EX, and immediately it comes up with Example Patient. Now, in this window right here, in this window pane, up at the top portion, it shows the patient name. When that patient has been selected and they're highlighted, then the bottom pane automatically shows all of their exams that I have here in my records. And so it's a quick way to immediately access a patient, see the exams. Now what I want to do is go through how to add a patient. This is one of the fundamental things you need to do to get started with AcuGraph, and it's quite easy. Simply click on Add Patient, and you'll need to type in first name, last name, date of birth. So let's just go ahead and type in somebody here. Now you'll notice that some of these items have stars. The first name, last name, date of birth, and gender. Those are the items that have a little asterisk next to them, and those are the items that you must enter in order to add a new patient. The other items are optional. The telephone, the patient ID, address, and so on. These are all optional, although one that I do really recommend that you get, the email address. That's going to be important if you want to email your reports out to your patient. By putting it in here now, it'll automatically be in there when you're ready to email. So once you've gone ahead and collected the information that you're going to need, you click on either Add New Patient and Begin Exam, and that'll take you straight into an exam, or Add New Patient and View Patient List, and that will take you right back here to the patient list. And now this new patient, Susan Shepard, that I just made up, has been added and is in there ready to go. So if I clear out the search right here, then it takes me back to the list, and we can see that we have Susan Shepard here in the list. Couple of other things. One, you can go in and you can edit patients. And so this patient that I just showed you, or that just created, Susan Shepard, if I click on Edit Patient, I can go in and change any information I want. The other thing I want to show you is right here where it says patient is active, down at the bottom of the window. The purpose of that is because you can't delete patients, you can't delete records, and that's in order to preserve the integrity of the records in AcuGraph. They are not deletable. But if you have patients that are no longer active and you don't want them to show up in the patients list all the time, you can simply uncheck the patient is active, and that patient will no longer show up in the patient's list. And then if you want to see that patient again later, you just have to go in and tell it to show active patient. So let me show you how that works. I've unchecked this patient and I've saved it. And now we can see that Susan Shepard is indeed gone from the list. If I type Susan, I get Susan Smith and Susan B. Anthony, but I don't get Susan Shepard. And so if I want to see that inactive patient, I simply go into Preferences. I type Show Inactive or I select Show Inactive Patients here, save that setting. And then when I close the window and go back and search again, here's my inactive patient now showing. And I can go edit and make that patient active again. So that's a little bit about patient management in the patient's window here. Very quick and easy to do. It's designed to be simple and get you to the important part fast. And the important part is, of course, doing the exam and interpreting the results. So there we have patient's window. If there are any questions, this is a good time to ask about patients and patient management in the patient window. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to what's called the records window next. Records window is this icon right here. And we will go ahead and select a patient first. You see, if you go to records and there's no patient selected, you just get the message that says you have not selected a patient. So we'll go in here and we'll just select my example patient that I have here. That patient's now selected because their name is highlighted. So when I go to the records window, I can now see a list of all the various records that I have available for this patient. And so when I look at this list, I can see then that I have various graphs, and those have a graph icon. I have notes, and these have the note icon next to them, a little yellow note. Those are the two types of records. Now, if there is a new note or something that is very recent that is still editable, then that will have a different icon. That'll have a pencil. Let me show you what that looks like. For my example patient here, I'm going to click on New Note, and I'm going to use the space down here to type a note. Now, let's go ahead and use a template. For example, I'm going to use my SOAP note template. So I go down to the template, I click that, and then I click on the green plus, and it has now put the template in there. SOAP being subjective, objective, assessment, and plan. And I could type in some subjective findings here. And objective, and so on. And when I'm done typing that, I save it, and you'll see now that I have a new note. And it has the pencil icon. Because it is new, I can go ahead and edit that. Now, it only remains editable for today. Tomorrow, I can no longer edit it. And again, that's to preserve the integrity of the records so that they can't be inadvertently changed down the road. Of course, you can always go in and add a new note if you need to continue the record for the patient. Or if you need to alter something in the past, just add a new note that alters it. So that is how we do notes in the records window. And I can click on it again and see it there. If I want to look at exams in the records window, then I can go in and I can click on exams. So here's an exam. And if I click on more than one, then the icon down here says compare. If I only have one clicked, then it just says view graph. And clicking that will, of course, take me to the graphs window where I can view that record, view that graph from the patient. I'm going to pause here. I see that somebody has typed a question about patients. The question says, now when you click on patients, all of the patients show up. How do you get it back to have them hidden for HIPAA purposes? Let's go ahead and show that one. We simply click on this icon right here that says hide all. And now they're hidden for HIPAA purposes, and they'll stay hidden even if I go to other tabs and so on. Say we go over here to the AcuGraph tab and come back. They'll stay hidden until I say show all again. So it will remember that setting. Good question. Thank you for asking that. Jumping back in now to the records window. So here we have a listing of records. I can scroll through this list and you can see that it is organized by date and time. Date and time starting with the most recent on top and moving on backwards. And you can have multiple notes on the same day. You'll see that it's organized by days. So here on June 7th, for example, there were 2 exams and 2 notes. And it will organize everything that happened that day by day so that I can look at everything for June 7th all in one list. I see a question here that says, how do you delete a graph? Answer is, you cannot delete graphs. Once you've actually performed a graph, it stays as part of the record, and that again is to preserve record integrity, because unfortunately when you can delete a graph, it's possible to accidentally delete them. We've had that happen, and so due to so many requests, we've actually made it so that records or graphs like that can no longer be deleted. Okay, so that handles the Records tab. One other thing I wanted to point out, though, in Records is that if I click on Select All, and then I click on Print, I can actually print all of the patient records all together. And this is really useful. Suppose you want to print out that patient's entire group of records. Maybe you need it for their file, maybe you need it for an insurance submission, for whatever purpose, then you can just select everything, print it, and you'll get it all in one printout. That'll include the graphs and the notes. So you can deselect all again. And so that's kind of the purpose, is to get all of the records in one spot and to be able to manage them all in one place for that patient. So that handles the Records window. If there are any other questions about the Records window, go ahead and type them now. And then I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Exam window. So for the Exam window, I'm going to go ahead and select a patient. You have to have a patient selected to perform an exam. Then I'm just going to click on Exam. By the way, the shortcut, if I've got a patient selected and I simply click on the Enter key, that will take me directly to an exam. Or if I double click on the patient, that will take me directly to an exam as well. So a couple of shortcuts. Obviously, we wanted to make it fast and easy. Once you've got a patient selected, most likely you're going to jump right into doing an exam on that patient. So we want to just jump right in, and we made all the shortcuts there lead to the exam. So here we have the exam window, and you can see that it started out with lung 9 on the left. You can see that it has selected the source point exam because that's where I had left it last time I used it. It will remember the type of exam that you used last, and that's the one it will open to. Now, I get asked a lot about the different types of exams, and I want to spend a minute talking about each one of them and what their purpose is. The source point exam uses the UON source points. These are the most energetically active points on the meridian, and so they're great representative points to see what the channel energy is doing. And they are essentially similar to the original Ryodoraku that was developed by Nakatani. The difference is that the Ryodoraku exam, which is this one down here, I'll switch to that, it does two things differently. First of all, it uses the abbreviations that Nakatani originally used. So here you'll see H1, for example. And H1 means hand 1, which he designated lung 9 as the first hand point, or hand 1. And then as we go through the exam, hand 2, hand 3, and so on. And then for the foots, you'll see foot 1, foot 2, and foot 3. The other thing you'll notice is that they won't all be Jingwell points. They won't all be Yuan source points. Some of them will not be. 8 of the 12 are actually the Yuan source points, and 4 of the 12 are not. And that was how he originally designed the exam. However, most people have found it more beneficial to standardize simply on the Yuan source points, and so the source point exam uses just source points. Now the Jingwell exam, this uses the Jingwell points out at the fingertips and toe tips. One of the advantages to this exam is that these points are really just easy to find. You can't miss them because of where they're located at the corner of the nail bed. And a lot of people use this exam as well for musculoskeletal issues because this exam, the Jingwell point is the intersection where the musculotendinous branch intersects the main channel of the meridian. And so you get the musculotendinous branches when you are examining the Jingwell points. So when you have a musculoskeletal issue, a Jingwell exam is a good idea. Also, because the musculotendinous branches serve as reservoirs for the main meridians, it's a good idea to look at the reservoir status. When you've got a chronic problem or an issue that's really difficult to work with, that's not responding well, then looking at the Jingwell will show you what's going on in the reservoirs, and if there's problems there, it's a good idea to correct those problems. So do the Jingwell exam and treat accordingly. And so those are the different exam types. Yuan source point, main meridians, it reflects the main channel and the organ. The Jingwell reflects the musculotendinous branches. The Ryodoraku is using a slightly different set of points and different set of abbreviations to accomplish essentially the same thing. Then the last one is the single point exam. This is new in AcuGraph 4, and the single point exam is designed for one purpose only, and that is to test and retest the same point over and over again. And so I'm just going to do a few tests here. As I'm testing, you see it gathered a reading, put it at 101, put a dot on the map. Now my next reading, there it goes. And as I continue to take readings, it will make a little chart. It'll give me a little line graph showing the balance of the readings as I go. And so this is useful, for example, if you are testing the effect of a particular treatment or a particular herb, for example, on a particular meridian. An example that I like to use, I actually once watched a guy do this, and I thought it was really fascinating because he was using AcuGraph to do it, and that was before AcuGraph 4. He was using AcuGraph 3 to do this, and he had a patient that had a deficiency in the liver channel. And so he had an herbal formula that he was going to use to help tonify that liver channel. And so what he did is he got down on liver 3, the U on source point, and he had tested it, and he tested it repeatedly, and it was testing, somewhere between 50 and 60. And then he started to give this patient the herbal supplement. And as he gave them, and I actually just had this patient hold in their hand the herbal capsules, and as he dropped more capsules into the hand, he kept measuring. Each time he dropped a capsule, he would remeasure liver 3. And all of a sudden, after I think it was 5 capsules, liver 3, which had been reading in the 50s, suddenly jumped to like 80. And he said, okay, so that's the dosage. Now, this is something that you may want to experiment with, to try yourself. We're not condoning a particular method of using this. We're simply saying if you want to test and retest points, here is the ability to do it, however you'd like to do that. And we've had this widely requested from a lot of people who want to use it for testing things. So there you go. It does not save any of these readings. Somebody just gave a message, by the way, said the sound went away, but now the sound is back. Hopefully we've all got sound now. If you're not getting sound, please type into the question. Let me know that you're not. Okay, somebody has written, and this is a great question. I'm glad somebody brought this up. In the manual, it suggested not repeatedly testing the same point because the actual test can alter the next reading. So how do we distinguish the causes of the single point changes? Excellent question. I'm glad you brought this up. The best way to explain this is to explain what goes on in the skin when we begin a test. When you start out, the skin is what we call neutral. There is not an ionic gradient one way or the other typically. And when you start to introduce an electric current at a spot on the skin, at an acupuncture point, an ionic gradient begins to develop in the skin to resist that flow of current. And that is why when the current starts to flow, it flows very rapidly, and as it rises, it hits a plateau. And that ionic gradient is what causes it to hit a plateau as it begins to resist the flow of electricity. And that's why in a typical reading, you start at 0 and it shoots up to, well, in this case, it shot up to, around 100, 101. It kind of leveled off, and that was the reading that it captured because at that point, the resistance of the skin equaled the amount of current that was flowing from the probe. So far so good. That's what happens on a typical reading. Now, when you go back and do a second reading, that ionic gradient may change simply because now it has already started to develop. It may develop faster, it may develop slower, more, and it may not develop as strongly. And so you end up with readings that tend to be different the second time. However, once you have, and that's why we recommend that once you've done your graph, the skin needs to rest for a matter of several hours before you do another graph because you want to start from a baseline of 0 with no ionic gradient. Now, this single point exam actually does the opposite. It takes it to the maximum ionic gradient. So instead of starting from a baseline of 0, after you've done that first reading, you've maxed out the gradient. And so now you're starting out with the ionic gradient maxed. And when you do that, starting from the maximum point each time and reading it over and over and doing it in rapid succession, with just a few seconds between readings, then you get very good reliable readings of that point at its maximum resistance. And so as that maximum resistance changes, you can track that. Since when we're graphing, we're not reading points at maximum resistance. That's why we don't recommend graphing repeatedly unless you're going to graph, each point 3 times in a row in rapid succession and then do a graph, which is just too cumbersome. So that's a lengthy explanation, but the bottom line is when you're doing a graph, take the first reading, that's the one you want, and then let the skin rest. If you're going to repeat stuff, then you've got to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and max out that skin resistance. And that's what it does when you do this single point exam. So, good question. Thank you. So those are the exam types then. Source, Jingwell, Radaraku, and single point. Now, there's also, when you are doing the exams, you'll notice that the volume controls are down here in the lower right corner. We got asked that one a lot. Hey, how come I can't turn off the speech anymore, which used to be in preferences? And the answer is you can. It's right here on the screen. You can turn the speech off or on, set the volume of the probe tones as you go. And so then as you take the readings, it will automatically fill in the readings. So I'll just go ahead here and take a few readings. You'll notice that I have mine set for about 3 seconds per reading. And so at 3 seconds, it automatically captures the reading, gives me a double beep, and moves on to show me that it's gotten it. And it automatically advances. Now, if you've used AcuGraph at all, this should be familiar to you. And the automatic advancing and so on. And when you've taken the last reading of the exam, then it automatically gives you your graph. And so it's literally a hands-free process in terms of touching the computer. Once you've started the exam, then you never need to touch the computer again until the exam is completed and you're actually looking at the graph. And we do that on purpose so that you can focus on the patient, focus on your point location, on your probe technique, without having to go back and forth and touch the computer. Also, the speaking exam and the tones from the probe give you audio feedback, so you don't even need to look at the computer. And again, you can focus on the patient. All right, the other thing to look at here in this window is screening mode. When screening mode is active, you'll see that it says screening mode active here, and I've just clicked on that, and it has completely eliminated the points that are on the feet. It did that because when I'm at a public screening, perhaps I don't want to ask perfect strangers to take their shoes and socks off and let me measure their feet, because some people might be uncomfortable with that. Additionally, it will take more time. And frankly, at a public screening, usually you'll have such a line of people waiting that minimizing the time on the exam is a good thing. So you'll go through, you'll measure just the hands, and when you're done, you'll get an exam, or you'll get a graph that just shows the hand meridians. And that graph will, of course, give the pie chart showing just the hand meridians on the pie chart. And it looks like it's half completed. And that's on purpose. We did that intentionally so you can show the patient, hey, this is only half completed. What we really want to do is have you come to the office. We'll do this, and we'll do the full exam. We'll measure all your meridians, not just your hands, and we'll get a full picture of what's going on, and then we can treat accordingly. So that's what screening mode is for. It's designed as a tool for rapid screening. It will not give you good treatment information. In fact, it won't recommend treatment information, and that's because it's only done half an exam. You can't design a treatment when you've only looked at half the meridians in the body. It just doesn't make sense. So it's strictly there as a marketing tool, but as a marketing tool, it's really effective. When people go out and do screenings, they get great results. We routinely hear from folks who go out, do a weekend health fair, for example, maybe have a booth for 4 hours at the health fair, and they've gotten 8 new patients off that 4 hours of effort at the booth. We've had people get 20, 30 patients in a single weekend. So great thing to do. If you don't have the screening mode, it's an optional add-on. There is a price associated with purchasing it, but well worth it, and the price really is quite low. Okay, so that handles the exam window. If anyone has any questions about the exam window, go ahead and type them now. Meanwhile, I'm going to just give a couple of pointers for how to use the probe. First of all, for the moisture, you want to dunk the probe tip. Make sure you have the cotton tip on there. You'd be surprised. I've run into folks that didn't know they were supposed to insert that cotton end into the probe tip. So make sure the cotton end is in there. Make sure that you've dunked that tip in water, submersing it in water or spraying it with water, but get it nice and wet to the point that it's dripping. And then you want to tap it on some absorbent cotton or on a towel. Tap it 2 or 3 times so that it's no longer dripping wet. And when you touch the skin, it should just leave a moist circle. It should not run or drip on the skin. And that's how you know your moisture is correct. And usually once you've moistened the probe, you can do all the hand points, and then you moisten it again, and you can do all the foot points. And that's how you get through an exam. Probe pressure, generally just resting the weight of the probe on the skin is adequate pressure. You don't need to press hard, and you want to try to do it uniformly from point to point, because if you intentionally, push harder and softer, you can alter your readings. If you're just resting the probe, the readings will be quite stable. And you want to try and stay perpendicular to the skin as far as your angle goes. So those are the tricks for the probe. We do have something new in AcuGraph 4 that I want to address that's called the training mode that'll help you get up to speed with how to use the probe properly. First, there's a question here I want to answer. Somebody said, hey, how about amputees? That's a great question. If you're talking about just a single channel, like somebody's lost a finger, for example, and you can't read the Jingwell point on that finger, it is permissible to go further up the meridian to the point that you can read on that meridian and read there. If you're talking about someone who's missing an entire limb, for example, someone missing a hand or an arm, then you're going to miss those 6 readings, and frankly, it's going to be difficult to get a good valid graph. Now, there's 2 approaches. One approach I've heard is people read the opposite limb and then just type in the readings to be the same on the other side. And that may be a valid approach, although I can't say that I've ever studied that to see if it is. The other approach is you simply can't graph someone who's missing those. And, if someone's missing an arm, you're also going to have a hard time doing pulses. So you have to adapt and do the best you can. That's a great question about amputees that gets asked from time to time. To edit a graph, by the way, you can click on any square and you can just type in a reading if you need to, or you can go in and highlight one that's already been typed and type in a new one. And to move forward and backward, the tab key, tab, moves you forward. If you hold the shift and hit tab, it moves you backward. And so if you're editing an exam, for example, and you need to move forward or backward, or maybe you missed a point and you need to go back, just click on the square or use the tab key to move around in the exam. Now, for the training mode, I'll just go over this briefly. In the preferences window, if you go under measurement, click on measurement, you can turn on what's called training mode. Training mode requires each point to be measured twice. I'm going to close that. And now when I go to take a measurement, I'll measure this triple energizer here. The first reading, it no longer is timed. I can go as long as I want. I can move all around until I find the exact location of the point. The way I'll know that it's the exact location of the point is that it reads high. So for example, right now it's reading low, but if I move just slightly over here, it goes up into the 70s, it's high. And if I move off that point, it goes low again, down into the 50s. So now that I've located the point, I stop. Then I go right to that exact point that I read before, and I read it again. And now it's timed. It's gonna capture that reading after 2 seconds. So what it does is on each point you search first, then you take the probe off, then you put the probe back on to read. Search, then read. Search, then read. And the purpose of that is to help you get really comfortable with locating the points electrically. Because as you know, sometimes electrically they are in a different location than the traditional anatomical location that you're used to and that you were taught in school. And that's because we're reading electrically. So by using the probe in that way, you can scan around, find the electrical location of that point, and read it, and that's going to get you the most accurate reading. I find that once you've done 10 or 12 graphs, then you don't need training mode, that you're going to be very proficient at, within that 3 seconds of time, scanning, finding, locating, and reading. But the training mode gives you all the time you need. So that's training mode. And to turn that off again, in measurement, under the preferences, you just uncheck that. By the way, notice that in the measurement preferences, there are 3 different preference windows. There's the source, or the Yuan, there's the Jingwell, and there's the Rotoraku. And so it's important that you realize that you can set each one of them separately. Training mode, you might not need that on Jingwell points because they're just not hard to locate. But you might need it on the Yuan points. So there you go with that. Okay, we'll close that. And now, done with the exam window. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and type it into your little question dashboard there Be glad to answer them. I'm going to move on now to the graphs window. So I'm going to go back to this patient that we've been working with, and we'll just select a graph. I'm just randomly picking one, and some of these are test graphs that I just threw together that may not be very good test cases. This one's kind of ugly. I want to go to one that's a little simpler first. So I'm going to hit previous here. And okay, we'll start with this one. This is a nice simple graph. And again, I'm going to assume that we've got some beginners on the webinar today, as well as some advanced users. And so I'm going to start with the basics. You can see that the graph is organized by colors. And the default, you can change these colors, but the default is green is normal, red is excessive, like gallbladder here, blue is deficient, like heart over here, and then this purple color is split. Split is when you have a left-right imbalance. So here with bladder, you can see the left side reads 52, the right side reads 86, and so clearly there's a big difference between the left and right sides. And we want to make sure that that difference gets addressed because they should be rather close to the same. All right, so the left side of this graph, and this is the baseline graph, shows the hand meridians. The right side shows the foot. So we have the 3-hand yin, lung, pericardium, heart, the 3-hand yang, small intestine, triple energizer, large intestine, and then the foot, 3 yin, 3 yang. So that's how it's organized. These horizontal bars, this 82 right here, the horizontal green line, that is the average or the mean of the graph. And that's where everything should be close to. We want everything close to the average, and that means everything's balanced. The upper and lower numbers, the 95 here on this red line and the 69 on the blue line, that shows the upper and lower range of the normal range, or the upper and lower limit of the normal range for this patient today. So things that appear outside that normal range are going to be noted, like this triple energizer being excessive and this heart being deficient. So that's the simplicity of it. That's how you read the graph. Now some people say, well, what if only one leg is normal? Like lung here, 75 on the right, but only 54 on the left, because one side of the lung is normal, it's going to land in normal, unless it's big enough difference to be split, like bladder over here, in which case it's going to show up as a split. Okay, so that's the baseline graph. By the way, if you ever have a question about a particular graph, you can just click here on the question mark in the upper right corner, and it will give you the overview of what the graph is and what it means and how it's shown. Now, another similar thing you can do, you can click on any of the graph bars. Let me show you. For example, if I click on heart, heart is showing as deficient. If I click on that bar, then it shows me the heart channel, shows me where it runs. I can discuss with the patient, perhaps there's pain along the channel or a symptom where the channel runs, and I can show them where the channel goes. And then I can go on through the whole graph by simply clicking these arrows to move forward and backward. So here is that bladder channel that was split, and of course the meridian is color-coded to show the split and show the bladder channel. One other thing that we'll show on the graph is over here in the treatment section. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the baseline treatment for now, the basic treatment. When I roll over a treatment point, it turns the corresponding bars on the graph a highlighted color to show that it will address that imbalance. So for example, I see heart is blue because it's deficient. But when I roll over it with the heart 9 point, then I see that heart turns yellow to show me that heart 9 will address the heart deficiency. And so on, triple energizer 10, and I can go through and I can turn each one of these yellow. And hopefully, with this webinar, your screen is updating quick enough to see those as they change color. So, rolling over these highlights the graph bars. Clicking on a graph bar shows the meridian channel. And then clicking on the question mark gives the explanation about the graph. Down the right side here, I have all the different graph types. So I have yin versus yang, and that will put the yin channels on the left along with their average. The average yin for this patient is 71. Average yang is 94. So we can see that this patient may have some yin deficiency. We want to see that, of course, get addressed. And then, of course, they're organized by their energetic families, Tai Yin, Xiao Yin, Jue Yin, and so on. And again, I can click on the question mark if I want. It will give me the information about the graph. Okay, next, the 5 elements graph, or excuse me, the bi-element graph. This organizes the meridians into their element pairs, and it gives the element averages. So up at the top, I can see that metal, lung, large intestine, that pair is averaging 76. and the two fires, and earth, wood, and water, and so on. And so I can look at the average and quickly see what what element is out of balance, which ones are most dominant, or which element is weakest. I can also see when you have an element that's disturbed, for example, and I don't see one here, but let's suppose this heart was deficient and small intestine was really excessive. Then I would say, wow, Emperor Fire is quite disturbed because heart and small intestine are so different from one another. This graph doesn't show that, but that's something you can watch for. The 5 elements chart puts the elements together on their 5 elements chart, and it puts the averages there. And so look at fire. It averages 77, earth 77, metal 76, water 74, wood 110. Well, I can pretty quickly see, even from across the room, which element is disturbed. It's wood, obviously, because it's so far different from the others. And primarily that's due to this excessive gallbladder. If I go back to my baseline graph, we can see that that gallbladder is quite high. If I put them together, I can see, liver, gallbladder pair here. Liver is running just kind of average, but gallbladder being so high is what's driving that element up there. And again, it's coded with excessive, deficient, and split with the plus sign, the minus sign, and the X. The energy cycle graph shows the Horary cycle throughout the day, starting at 3 a.m. and going on through the day. So you can literally track the energy movement throughout the day. Another way to do that is on the Horary chart. This is the traditional round Horary chart that we're all used to. And you'll see that there's all these pie slices, one for each meridian channel. And the pie slices are partially colored. And the coloring, the degree to which the pie slice is filled in, shows overall the amount of chi in that channel. And so, for example, here, liver, it's right between the blue line and the red line. And again, that's the same normal range that we saw on the baseline graph. And so liver's falling right in the normal baseline. Lung, showing a little bit low, on average. Large intestine, right in the baseline, and so on. And as we can go around, we can see energetically what's going on through the day. From 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. during heart time, I see that this patient with a deficient heart, they may experience some symptoms at that time of day. Gallbladder time as well, which is just opposite of heart, may show some symptoms from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. And this is a great way to isolate symptoms when your patient has a time of day symptom. Great way to show it to them and what goes on with their energy throughout the day. All right, the ratios graph. This one generates a lot of questions. So I'm going to go through this one, and then, of course, if you have questions, go ahead and type them, and I'll answer them as we go. But to begin with, on the questions, I see that we have, it's not on the questions, I'm sorry. To begin with, on the ratios, we have on the left side the chi energy level, and that is showing 82%. Now, people say, well, 82% of what? What exactly does that chi energy level mean? Let me show you. If we go back to the baseline, we see this number 82 right here. That is the mean, or the average of the graph. That 82 lands right here and shows you where that average is. Now, you want the average to land in the green area. If it's too much, or if it's too little, then that's a problem that may need to be addressed. So overall, that is simply telling you the average of the patient's readings. Here is the average, it's 82. Next, we come over here and we look at the yin-yang balance. Yin-yang balance is simply the balance that we looked at on the yin-yang graph. 71 for yin, 94 for yang. So when we go to the ratios screen, that yin-yang balance is going to show that it is yang dominant, 24% more dominant. And that little caret lands over in yang. And ideally, we'd like to see that caret close to the middle and well balanced. Next one is energy stability. Energy stability is right over here. And we have in the stability section is, of course, green at the top, red at the bottom, obviously showing that we want a higher number for stability. Now, what does stability mean? Stability is a measure of how much variability there is in the graph. This graph doesn't have a lot of variability. Its lowest point is here at 52. Its highest point is at 136. So that's the total range of the graph, between 52 and 136. The peaks and valleys, although there are some, they're not as pronounced. And so stability landed kind of medium good. It's within the lower limits of normal for stability. If we were to choose a different graph, for example, let's just go through and pick an ugly graph here. Okay, this is a nice ugly graph. Let's go look at the ratio here. That stability is only 41%, because this graph has really low valleys, really high peaks. It's all over the place, not very stable. So it's going to end up with a poor stability reading. That's what stability has to do with. Now we'll go back to the graph we've been working with. Okay, and then we have the person in the middle. We have the upper-lower balance and the left-right balance all shown together on this crosshairs type of representation. And then we have the plus sign in the middle. That plus sign will move up and down based on the upper-lower balance. And upper-lower simply means the arm meridians versus the leg meridians. Left-right, obviously, is the left side meridians versus right side meridians. And so we can see that this patient is 8% more dominant on the right, so the plus sign has moved to the patient's right, and 11% more dominant on the lower body, so it has moved down. Perfect balance, of course, would have that plus sign centered right here in the middle of the crosshairs. And when it's moved out of the center of the crosshairs, then that means that we obviously need to do a little bit of balancing. Now, 11% and 8%, those are not big numbers. This is not a huge imbalance. But if those numbers are 10, 20, 30, 40%, then that's really a large imbalance for upper, lower, or left, right. And obviously balancing will help address that. Next graph type down is the PI, or Personal Integrated Energetic Graph. Now the PI score is what we designed to help the patient understand all the other stuff. Because we can show a patient this picture here, the baseline graph, and they see some colors and some bars, but they don't really know. And I even say, well, more is better, isn't it? Don't I want them all to be up here at 200? Or we show them this, and they, again, see some pictures, but don't really understand it. So we've boiled it down to a single number. And we can look at that patient and say, your PI score on a scale of 0 to 100 is 69. And then over here on the scale, we can say, well, that 69 score, that's a fairly typical score. That's what we would expect someone to see who's, not altogether really well balanced, but overall not a train wreck either. And so, obviously, with some treatment, we would want to see that PI score get up into the very good range. Anything above 71 is considered very good. And when you see PI scores in the 80s or 90s, then that is an excellent score. It's not designed to go to 100. It theoretically can, and a perfectly balanced patient will show a 100 PI score. But it's obviously pretty rare to have a completely perfectly balanced patient across the board. I've had them, I'm sure you have too, but you know that they're quite rare. So that's the PI score. You'll notice that each of these pie slices is, again, partially filled in, unless it's green. If it's green, it's fully filled in, which means that it's fully balanced. But if it's partially filled in, then that shows the degree of the imbalance. So this split is considered the biggest imbalance because you see it's got the least filling on the pie slice. And they are color-coded again. Whether they're excessive, deficient, or split, you get the color coding of the blue, the red, and the purple. All right, then down here we have the information graph. This is simply printed information for the patient to read. Talks about each of the imbalances. It'll also give dietary recommendations, ratio information, element information, and so on. You'll find that this is a great tool for you clinically because the patient will have not told you exactly all of their symptoms. They will have forgotten to mention things and so on. And so you will, when you give them this report, you ask them to read through it and circle any symptoms they currently have or have had in the last 6 weeks. And you'll be surprised all the things they circle that they forgot to tell you about. So it's a great tool for that, as well as they'll love reading about themselves. Patients love reports that they can actually understand, which they don't typically get when they go see a medical doctor, for example, and they get a lab report that's a number or that is something that they can't read or much less even look at because no one will show it to them. So this is interactive, and patients really enjoy having this information, being able to read it and share it. Okay, so those are the graph types then. And clicking on any one of them on the right side immediately brings that up. When we go to the compare, let's just go ahead and select a bunch of graphs here. They don't have to be in order either. I can kind of pick and choose the graphs I want, pull up a comparison, and now you see I get a scrollable window of all these graphs, and I can actually just scroll through and look at the patient's history as it goes along. And then as I'm scrolling through, if I see a graph that I want to look at, I simply click on it and I'm back to that graph. And that history, or that comparison, when you scroll through multiple graphs, oops, we'll go through and let me select those again. We'll grab some multiple graphs here. And so I can see that I'm comparing the bar chart right now, the baseline, But I can switch that over and make it the elements or 5-element chart, ratios, even pi scores. Scroll through the patient's pi score history. And since I just kind of picked these at random, and since this is an example patient, they won't show a typical progression you would see with a real patient. But with a real patient, you can scroll through and see the progress of the pi score, which is a great thing to do. So that's how comparing works. And of course, we've already shown the previous and next. And whatever graph type I happen to be looking at, I can go previous and next and go through the patient's history. One other way to examine the patient's history is to click on this history button. Here on the history button, it will show you the last graphs. Now in this case, it's showing me 8 graphs. You can see that it's got the number 8 up here. 8 graphs starting from August 14th, 2009. And so here they are going on through the patient's history. August 14th, 2009 being the most recent, and then moving backward in time. And then it also shows, I'm sorry, these are the pi scores. So it shows the patient's pi score history. And again, since these graphs are kind of contrived in this example patient, the pi scores are just going to be random. But on a real patient, you'll generally see the pi score trending upward through time. You'll also see in this element history, you can look at the balance of the 5 elements. And so you can see, for example, that fire has been dominant, quite a bit of the time. And on a real patient, you'll find that they typically have a dominant element, typically have a least dominant element. Then you can also see what the most common imbalances are. An excessive large intestine in 4 out of the last 8 graphs. An excessive small intestine also, and triple energizer in 4 out of the last 8 graphs. So it gives you a way to see what the most common problems are in the patient's graphs, to give you the ability to focus more on a particular area. Now if you don't want to look at that many, then you can take this down simply by sliding. I've got it down to where it's now only showing 4 graphs. And it will show a maximum of 12 exams for the patient. So that's the history feature. So a lot of different ways to look at the historical trending for your patient. The history, the comparison, the previous and next. Of course, when you're ready to begin treatment, you can click on Begin Treatment and it will show you the treatment points. Let me move this into the window here, make sure you're seeing it. It will show you the treatment point and you can simply go next and next and it will show you the point. If you're going to be needling or using electric stim or laser or whatever you're doing, it will actually just take you through point by point. And if you want to do left and right, then you've done one side, you flip image, you do the other. So the flip image takes it back and forth from left to right. You'll notice that as I am in the treatment points window here, you'll see that there's a little bar over here on the right side. This bar is where I can use the search feature on AcuGraph and actually search for the point. And you can, scan around on the skin until you find the area of highest electrical conductivity, in other words, the highest reading, and that's where the point is. So if you want to be ideally sure that you're in the right spot, if you're using laser or inserting a needle or whatever you're doing, then you can use your AcuGraph probe to scan the skin and find the point exactly. So that's what the Begin Treatment button does. 2 other things to talk about on this window that have to do with the graphs, and then we'll be done with the graphs window. And again, if you've got questions, feel free to go ahead and type them, and we'll answer them as we go. Or we're going to be opening it up, and you can ask questions verbally at the end. When I'm done going through, we'll take questions, and you can just ask them. So whichever way you want to go. I do want to stop and point out, by the way, that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available in a recorded form afterwards. And I know that time is getting short, so I'm going to jump into a couple of things here quickly. Number 1, IntelliGraph. We've got a whole recorded screencast that talks about IntelliGraph, but briefly what it does is it compensates for readings that tend to always be a certain way. For example, the lung channel tends to always read higher than the gallbladder channel when you take across the board a population of patients. And we determined this by measuring over 100,000 patients and looking at these statistical numbers. And so lung shouldn't be compared directly to gallbladder because lung is supposed to be higher than gallbladder when it's normal. So it automatically adjusts for things like that, for discrepancies like that. And it does it based on the age, the gender, the mean of the graph, and whether it's a left or right meridian that you're looking at to give you the most accurate readings ever. Now, this was originally developed by Nakatani, who did it by using a paper scale that was staggered. And, it made it a little more difficult to do on paper, but the computer takes care of all that for you. IntelliGraph is on by default. If you try to turn it off, then it will warn you. And if you disable IntelliGraph, you'll see the graph actually looks different because it has no longer compensated for the normal readings of the meridians. We turn it back on, then we see that it is back to the graph we were looking at. The last feature to mention on graphs is normalize. Normalize here simply refers to when you have an outlying meridian, a meridian that is really far away from the mean. In this case, gallbladder. It is actually dragging the mean up. Because it is so high, it is causing this mean to be 82, when in fact that mean might be a little bit lower if gallbladder weren't so out there. So when I turn on normalize, we see that without gallbladder's influence, the mean is 77. Sometimes that will actually change the classifications of meridians, and it will change the number of treatment points. You'll still treat gallbladder. It is still excessive and needs to be treated, but it will no longer skew your results. And so my rule of thumb is I turn on normalize, and if it gives me fewer points to treat, then I keep the normalized. If it doesn't give me fewer points to treat, then I leave it off. Okay, so that's the graphs window. That is the biggest window in AcuGraph. That's where all of the stuff happens. For printing graphs, I want to talk about printing briefly. Then we'll take a quick run through AcuUrban Reference and open it up to questions. For printing, here you can choose all of the items that you want to include in your report. You'll see that this is what I have. Here's a first visit report. And you can save a saved report type, a different setting, where you can have a different printout group. So for example, if I want to have a report that includes the brief report for file, that's a nice one-pager I like to throw in the file. And let's say I want to also include, for example, dietary recommendations, but I want to leave out all the other graph types. I can go through and I can manually set all this every time, and that's great, and I'll get exactly what I want in my report. But if I want to save these settings as a preset, then I simply save it as a preset, and the way to do that, I can click on Add, I can create a new preset, type the name in here. If I can type on this funny keyboard, there we go. Save that, then I go in, click the settings I want, turn on the brief report, add the associated points, turn on dietary, take off notes, whatever I want to do, and then I click Save. And it has saved them. So now when I come back and go back to first visit, it has changed all the check marks, come back to this new report that I just made, and it puts it back the way I like it. So you can have different report types preset. If you've purchased a different language add-on for AcuGraph, then you can print your reports in another language. So if you have a patient, for example, that speaks Spanish, but you're graphing in English, you can still print a Spanish report for them. And you can email the report. If you have their email address, it'll automatically put it in here. If not, then you can type it in and it will prompt you and say, hey, do you want to save this email for the patient? Then click email and it sends it. So really nice and easy to do. You can have a custom cover page where you have created your own cover page in AcuGraph, maybe with your own picture, your clinic information. You can import that and have that attached to your reports as well. So you have a lot of flexibility in printing. Now, need to mention here, treatments. There are the different treatment types in AcuGraph. Right now we're on the basic treatment. It shows 8 points. It will just tonify what's low, sedate what's high, and then treat the splits. We have the advanced treatment. This graph doesn't show an advanced treatment, but often graphs will, and that will use the points more efficiently and usually be fewer points than the basic. And then we have the expert treatment. This will combine various treatment types. It will have some auricular points here under the auricular section, some body points, and it will have also some herbal recommendations. Often it'll have some home care recommendations, and if I've programmed custom recommendations, they'll be in there as well. So here for home care, it says I might want to consider using an auricular point, and I also might want to recommend the dietary stuff to the patient. That'll be shown in the information screen. Expert treatment, by the way, looks at the history. It doesn't just look at today's graph, but it also looks at previous graphs and says, wow, you know, that triple energizer has been excessive for the last 3 graphs in a row. We're going to use some enhanced features, some enhanced points to more effectively address triple energizer because it doesn't seem to be responding. The ear will show auricular points, and I can click on any of these and see the point and treat it. The next one, this picture of the spine, will show back shoe points. The divergent channels protocol will balance left-right, that's the splits, using back shoe points. Then it will do extraordinary vessels, and it will use the command and associated points for the extraordinary channels, and that will balance the upper lower of the patient. And then yin-yang, which is of course front-back, it will balance the yin-yang divergences. And you'll notice that some are plus and some are minus. That's for tonification and sedation. So it's a beautiful 3D balancing from top to bottom, from left to right, and from front to back, all in this divergent channels protocol. So it's a nice little protocol to use, particularly if you're using electric stim. Then you can set the plus and the minus and tonify and sedate. If we click on the picture of the vertebra and then go and click on any of these channels, it brings up our spinal picture. And the areas that are the darkest red are the areas that most likely have some spinal dysfunction. So on this patient, I can see that about T3 through T6 is probably an issue, and that is because of gallbladder, heart, triple energizer. And then down here, I can also see that sacrum may be involved. The ones that are not as dark red have a lesser chance of being involved. Okay, and it'll also give the associated muscles. Now I see that time flies when you're having fun, and we still have not gone into AcuGraph and reference. I'd like to do so briefly. I will spend about 2 minutes in each one, just hit some highlights, and then we'll open it up to questions because I know we need to end this webinar here shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and click on AcuGraph here and just briefly tell you that Find a Formula is a reference where you can look up a formula by what it does. For example, deficient pericardium. Or you can look them up in the catalog simply by going through the catalog and go to the elements. So in water element, here's a formula. Click that, and then it gives me all the info about that formula right here. There's a shopping cart that's automatically populated as you prescribe herbs from the herbal section in the treatments window. As you prescribe those herb formulas, then it will put them in the cart so that when you're ready to replenish them, you can just hit that Checkout Now button and place your order, and it'll automatically replenish everything you've used. And if you've set up an account, then you can actually have it automatically reorder for you. It sends it all encrypted to our servers. It's all completely safe, and you'll just get a box that shows up on your doorstep with your new herbs to replenish what you've used. So it's a great way to practice herbal addition to your graphing balancing. And then in the reference section, you click on reference, and you've got points, and here you can look up points by their function. So for instance, the Luo connecting point for the stomach channel is stomach 40. You can look up charts, and we have all kinds of charts here that are available, and you can go into these charts and you can roll over, and if you click on any point, then it will take you to that point. We have auricular charts as well, organs, musculoskeletal, and so on. And then under treatments, we have conditions, and here in the treatment conditions, you can look up by condition. So for example, the condition of constipation, it'll give primary points, some secondary points that may also be helpful, and then if you know that this patient has excess heat or has chi stagnation, then it will recommend points there too. And again, all these points are clickable. Click on any one of them to immediately get the reference information about that point and the photograph. So that's the reference section. All right, that pretty well takes us through AcuGraph, kind of at a whirlwind. Have a couple of questions that came up, and then I'm going to open it up for verbal questions. If you've got a verbal question, I want you to go ahead and click on your hand icon now to raise your hand. And when I see your hand is raised, then I'll call on you and I'll turn on your microphone and you can ask us a question. But first I'm going to handle these ones that were typed. One says, I have not been able to find the low points historically being used to balance left and right. Absolutely right. That's a great question. Answer. Historically, there was no left and right because when you take the pulses, they're one-sided only. So you couldn't say the left lung versus the right lung. There was no way to assess that by feeling a pulse or looking at a tongue. Only electrically can you assess that. So in the historical records, you're not going to find the left-right balancing because it simply just never occurred. But as we've been able to electrically test, we found that it is important. In fact, it's vital to balance left and right. And so we found that the low or connecting point does a really effective job of opening up the internal collateral that connects the left and right sides of the same meridian. So, good question there. Next says, oh, it's not a question. It just said, excellent and well done. Thank you. Good. Next question says, are we able to add to the program our own supplements? The answer is yes. I won't take a long time to show you how, but I'll just take a moment. You go to reference section. Yes, you go to reference section. I'm sorry, I got confused for a second. You go under treatments and you click custom. And here you can add a recommendation, simply new, put in the condition that'll trigger that. For example, an excessive lung combined with a deficient large intestine should trigger this recommendation. You type it in, you save it, and then next time that condition comes up, an excessive lung with a deficient large intestine, your recommendation will come up. So there you go. Next person said, thanks, doctor. I bought the AcuGraph 4, but I did not get the registration information. You're not supposed to get registration information with AcuGraph 4. If you're plugged into the internet, when you activate the program, it will automatically register itself through the internet without you having to do a thing. If you're not plugged into the internet and you have to do it manually, then just contact our technical support, and we'll take care of it for you if you have any issues. That's why you have free technical support, and we're more than glad to help you. Okay. Next question said, do we customize nutrition or is it automatic? For nutrition stuff, go ahead and customize it. Now, there are dietary recommendations that are already in there and they're automatic. But if you want to add nutritional recommendations or supplements, you do it right here on this custom treatment screen. The dietary recommendations are already in there. Those are for foods. Those are based on TCM principles, and those are not customized. All right, now let's take a look at, see who's got their hands raised, and we'll start taking questions. First of all, I see a question here from Cameron. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and you can ask your question. Okay, great question. I'm going to go ahead and answer that. His question was, is the software pre-programmed for what herbs to use for what imbalances, or do I have to go in and custom program that myself? The answer is it's pre-programmed. So looking at this graph example here, when I click on the AcuHerb treatment button right here, it gives me 4 possibilities for herbs, and they're pre-programmed based on the imbalances that are shown on the graph. You'll notice here in this column under the delta, you'll see a 4, a 4, a 2, and a 2. That column there shows the relative score for each formula. And so in this case, there are 2 formulas that scored a 4. And those then are the most highly recommended because they scored the highest. And so I simply, I can click on each one, and I can get information about that formula. I can prescribe it if I want by selecting the number of bottles to prescribe, but I can only do that within 24 hours of a graph. And then I prescribe it, and it automatically tracks that I have prescribed that. So there we have it. Oh, also I can click on the reason, and it will give me the reasons for the herbal recommendation. And it will show me, for example, in this case, balances the heart, tonifies yin, and balances water. Or this other one, balances the gallbladder, balances yin and yang, balances triple energizer. So in each case, it will tell me why it chose that formula for me. But it's all pre-programmed, nothing that you have to do or add. Okay, next hand I see raised is from Ricky Colmer. I'm going to go ahead and unmute that, and you can ask your question for the group. Ricky, are you there? I hear sounds, but I don't hear speaking. Ricky, question? Guess not. Okay. Well, if you still have a question, raise your hand again, Ricky, and we can activate you again. I see one other question here. Typed question. First, one person said, "This is a great way to study AcuGraph. Hope we have more of these in the future." Well, good. Thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying it, and we are planning to do more of these in the future. Next, I understand that we are able to test individual points several times over, but my question is, can we do an alarm point exam? If you wanted to go around and test all the alarm points on the body, it's not convenient. Your patient will have to disrobe, obviously. But if you wanted to do that, you certainly could. You would have to use one of the pre-programmed exams, for example, the source point exam, and instead of measuring the source point on each channel, you would measure the alarm point on each channel and look at that graph. You could certainly do that if you wanted to. I've had people ask that one before, and we have not put that in because everybody has their own different exam type, and we'd have to have 24 different exam types in there, which would lead to a lot of confusion and a lot of programming and a lot of headaches for everybody involved. So we've just kept it with the main ones, but you're certainly free to examine whatever points you want. Next person says, what about the dose? The dose of the herb formulas? Well, two ways to do it. One, you could just go with a typical dose, and each formula will mention that. So for example, when I scroll down here, the recommended dosage is 2 to 3 tablets twice daily with warm water. So you're looking at 4 to 6 tablets a day on this particular formula. And you can actually print out this as a tear sheet and give it to the patient. You can also dose manually if you wanted to, say, for example, test and retest a meridian and see how many pills the patient would have to take before that meridian balanced. That would be another way to do that I've seen done. Okay, I have a question here. It says a person has low back pain and the chart shows 6 or 7 imbalances. How many points should we treat? Well, first and foremost, you're going to want to address all the imbalances on the chart. So let's go to an ugly graph here. Okay, here's one that shows a lot of imbalances. If I go to the advanced treatment, well, it's going to be relatively fewer points because it can treat them in groups. Go to the expert treatment, there's going to be, again, just a few points. The basic treatment is going to be a lot of points, 14 of them. Bottom line is you want to address all of the imbalances, whether you're doing the basic, the advanced, or the expert. You'll want to address all the imbalances and then perhaps add some points for low back pain or for whatever the patient's chief complaint is. But there's no hard and fast rule for how many points to treat. Bottom line is treat whatever the graph shows. Treat the imbalances. If you wanted to only hit the most egregious imbalances, you could do that, I suppose. But we found that you get better results faster by addressing all the imbalances on the chart. Next question I see here, probably would want to keep the IntelliGraph off when doing alarm points. That's a good point, yes. Thank you for bringing that up. Because IntelliGraph is going to assume that you measured source or Jingwell points, and it's going to adjust accordingly. So, good question there. And, oh, Ricky says my mic is not working. Okay, appreciate that, Ricky. I see you typed your question, and that worked well. All right, folks, I don't see any more hands raised. We'll give it just time for maybe one more question. If anybody has one that they want to ask, go ahead and ask it now, or go ahead and raise your hand now. Otherwise, we're going to need to draw it to a close. I see one more question here. Someone said, next time around advancing AcuGraph, would you consider the use of single herbs, allowing for add-ons to formulas? Yeah, probably not a bad idea. We may consider that in a future release of AcuGraph. By the way, we get ideas all the time. I mean, constantly people email us, call us, and say, you know, you ought to think of this and that. And we really appreciate all that input because that is how the program gets better. And a lot of the new features that are in AcuGraph 4 were directly suggested by our users. So thank you. Keep up that feedback and keep that coming. All right, folks. Well, we've gone over time. I apologize. I appreciate your time. I know it's very valuable. I hope that you're finding AcuGraph to be really useful. We're going to go ahead and sign off now. Thanks to all of you who joined us today. And I will reiterate that we will make a recording of this available for later use if you want to go back and review it. If you have further questions, please email us or call us. And again, our support is always available for you. So thanks again and enjoy your AcuGraph. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.